tell us about life under COVID-19.
Yeah, and so I think in a lot of ways my life is not all that different, and that's part of the reason why I feel pretty lucky, like that a lot of the stress of this time comes from sort of external sources, and like thinking about how other people are doing, and sort of thinking about like what are the effects going to be in the future. But in sort of the short term, I have a studio in my apartment. I spent a lot of time, there have been many periods in my life where it's like, oh, it's been a few days, I haven't been outside, because I've just sort of like, on days that I'm not working, I'm in my studio. And all my jobs, I had 3 jobs and they all went online. And so in a lot of ways, I think it was just sort of like, go, 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 go. Okay, now do the same thing, but be online. And so I think the first few months, we're sort of just like, yeah, like day by day, like, okay, just have to like keep my responsibilities up today and do that thing. And I think now my teaching has ended, so now I have a little more time to be like, okay.
Were you teaching at 3 places, or?
I was teaching at 2 places, and then I also have I have like another day job.
Okay, I understand the hustle in NYC. I get it.
So I think the past few weeks I've been able to be like, okay, now my life is a little calmer. I actually have more time to make art. Like, how are you going to make the most of this time and this situation? And I think art is always the thing that helps me think through and process things. Like, for example, like I start every day that I'm in the studio, like I keep a journal, and it's not a very like emotional journal. It's just like, here's what happened today, but it helps me sort of like, okay, I exist in the world. Like, I'm in this place, what is happening? And then I think that's sort of like that's the time I give myself to like really think about like, what is your life? Like, what does it look like now? Where are you? Just like the basic questions.
That makes sense. I guess also your answer kind of leads back into the second question, which is, what does studio time look like for you right now? Which you talked about the journal, but maybe there are more kind of rituals or things that you're doing in your studios, since it's based at home, which is nice.
Yeah. And so I feel really lucky that I chose to have my studio at home, which is, I think, like it has trade-offs, but I think one of the things that's always been true about it is it means that if I have a moment, I can always go in there. Whereas I think if I had it in a different place, I would have to be like, okay, well, you don't feel like it, like I have a moment, and like, am I gonna put my coat on and go out the door? And so I think in general it makes your life sort of easier. And so the trade-off that I said was like, oh, you're not gonna have a community if you have your studio in your home. So then you have to like do things like the applying for the triangle thing, where you can have these moments where you get to like work with other people, but most of the time I'm just working by myself. So I would say that looks pretty similar to how it did before. Sort of oddly, the work that I was working on before had a lot to do with making paintings that were sort of about waiting. And like,
we're waiting right now, like literally.
And sort of those, like, I think a lot of I was just thinking about sort of how much of our lives are just spent like waiting. And especially if you're not like a rich person, a lot of the jobs that are available to you are basically to wait for rich people.
Wow.
So like I work for a woman on the Upper East Side, and so I'm often out doing errands for her during the middle of the day on the Upper East Side. And so like the only people who are ever out there during the day are like dog walkers, people delivering things. It's just basically like this whole economy of people who are just sort of like, oftentimes just sort of like sitting on the corner, like waiting in line for someone. And I was just thinking about like how time is such a precious resource to me, but so much of it feels like it's just spent like waiting.
The rich stay rich, yeah.
Or waiting for other people, and my boss isn't like a rich person, or it's not, it's a little bit less of like, I've done like almost, I feel like if you can do it in a rich person's home, I've done it. I would say this is like not totally that kind of job because she just runs a business. It
Mm-hmm.
happens to be on the Upper East Side, but like I babysat, I've gardened in people's homes, I've tutored, I've done all those things, and so I was making these paintings that were supposed to feel like very slow and sort of about that. So actually I feel like I'm very emotionally attuned to what that feels like right now. So it's sort of easy to like get into that headspace. And then I was also making paintings that were sort of like the reverse of that, which feels like, okay, so you spend your whole day waiting for people, waiting for the subway, spending over an hour to get home on the subway, which I'm not anymore. That's one thing that's gone away. Um, and then you're told like you have to do the world's best workout in the next half an hour, and like you have to like cook an amazing dinner, but you can do it like secretly super quick if you get an Instant Pot, and like just like
Yeah.
it feels like the rest of your life is being told like you can be amazingly efficient and get everything done like super
In
quickly.
one day. Yes. Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of make paintings that felt faster. I think I'm definitely a slow painter, and so that's been more of a challenge. Like I'm like, I'm gonna make this painting today, and then like 3 weeks later, I'm like, I'm still working on this painting, huh? Um, but so I've been sort of working on that series, and then there's like this imaginary painting that hopefully I'll make at some point that sort of is the link between the two. That's like those rare moments when you're like, oh, I'm actually present in this moment.
Yeah. That makes
I'm not
sense.
like waiting for something to happen and just thinking like, oh, won't it be nice when the weekend comes? Or just like rushing through something and like trying to get to the next thing. You're just like, oh, I'm actually existing.
Mm.
Um, and so that's the sort of the thing I'm working on right now. And actually, I think I've sort of been able to continue that. I think when everything first started, I just sort of had to be like, you can give yourself permission not to like push yourself in the studio.
Mm.
You have 3 jobs. You're rushing around
Yes.
like constantly.
It's
Like this can be a
okay.
moment that like you can work in the studio, but you don't have to like. But I'm excited for a summer to be able to spend more time working on that stuff.
Yeah. And I think just to talk a little bit off of what you're saying, that a lot of people are finding that although this is like a very unpredictable time, kind of like a tragedy, people are also kind of discovering like, oh, I realize I haven't been living my life the way that I want. I've just been kind of going through the motions of living life because, they're forced to objectively look at the fact that I'm not going to work, I'm not getting paid. What are the things that I enjoy outside of all of that?
Yeah.
Especially in the US, which our work culture is crazy. So,
Yeah. And I think in some ways like being an artist makes you think about that constantly because
mm,
it's a very stupid thing to do practically. Like if you just want to have like a nice quality of life, it might not be the thing you want to choose. And so you have to, I feel like I've had to spend a lot of time thinking like, why am I doing this thing? What sacrifice is worth it? Like what are my priorities? Like if money was object, what would I be spending my days doing? It's like, well, I'd still be spending them doing art. So, and sort
mm-hmm.
of like, I feel very lucky because I still have a source of income. Like I think I'd be a lot less productive if I wasn't, because I would just be totally freaked out
Yeah,
about
yeah,
what was going on and like how I was going to, the times in my life that I've been looking for a job, I've been like, I have all this free time. I should be making art, but I can't because I'm just so
mm,
stressed out about this. So I know that like free time isn't always just like magical and,
yeah,
and productive. But I think I have spent a lot of time in my life thinking about that question and like maybe structuring my life in a way that's different from that of a lot of my friends and like
mm,
having priorities that are different and then sort of slowly seeing how like our lives diverge because of that and still being friends with them but sort of like that's definitely something that like this choice sort of I know that takes me sort of farther and farther away from a lot of people's sort of life monuments and
mm-hmm. Makes sense. So I'm not going to ask number 3 since you kind of answered already, but I am gonna ask number 4, which is what have you been reading, watching, or looking at lately? Any recommendations?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have a lot of recommendations. Weirdly, I used to do all my reading on the subway.
I used to do that too, though. That was really convenient. And so,
Yeah, I actually love the subway for that. Like I love to read and I read a lot of fiction. I primarily read fiction.
mm,
Um, that's sort of like my other great love, and I think a lot about my paintings in terms of fiction, in terms of like how they can tell a story. Um, but I haven't been reading that much since that's another thing I'm hoping to get back into. One book that I read recently that I thought was super interesting. It's this book called Meander, Spiral, Explode, by a woman called Jane Allison, and it's a
mm,
book she's sort of proposing alternative ways to structure your narratives. So she's saying, why do we always sort of like think we need to structure with like beginning, middle, end, like
mm,
introduction, conflict, climax, resolution, and instead saying like we can think really visually about the way we structure our stories and think about them in terms of spirals, and we can think about them in terms of, you know, discrete cells. We can think of them as forking paths. And it's just a really interesting book because she pulls on a lot of visual metaphors and talks about the structure of writing in terms of paintings and in terms of visual things. So that was just super interesting for me to think about also because um, I'm while I was in grad school, I made this work of image and text that I was really interested in. It was sort of my first attempt to try and figure out like how my images could live next to text. And so that's something I've just sort of been thinking about in general, is because I think so much about writing and fiction, like how do I make that maybe more apparent to somebody who encounters my work? Um,
yeah.
and also, this is like sort of going off on a little bit of a tangent, but one of the things I think a lot of with my art is I love making paintings. I'm really interested in the medium of painting, but I also know that like the end product is something that can only be owned by one person, and realistically, it's owned by a rich person. Like
Mm.
if you're successful, what happens is that a bunch of rich people, some of them probably very nice, own your work. But obviously, like I think for most artists, those are not the people who they most identify with or they most
Yeah.
wish to be seeing their work. And so I've for a long time thought about, could there be another strand of my work that is more accessible?
Okay, so the last question is, what are you hoping to see happen in the art world after COVID-19?
Yeah. So I've been thinking about that one. It's interesting. Um, I think I think there's a lot that I would hope to see. I don't know how hopeful I am about it happening. And I think a lot of things that I would hope to see are things that I've been hoping to see.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking a lot about how it feels like I'm trying to figure out how I can like put this simply. I feel like I'm sort of meandering all over. But um it seems like, and this is true, I think, from outside of art and also within art, that so much of like the value we place on art is monetary. And we it's like if you look on a lot of the art news sites, most of the stories seem to be this artwork sold at auction for this much. Like
Mm-hmm.
this billionaire is promoting this artist. This person is creating a splash at, you know, this international art fair.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like those people who, you know, a lot of them love art, but a lot of them are speculating on art and treating it as a luxury commodity, are the ones sort of driving the conversation around art.
Mm-hmm.
And I think along with that, it's become, I think maybe in a previous generation, it would seem really uncool to like sell out and to be like, my art's going to be on a Louis Vuitton bag or something. Now that seemed like, hey, way to go. Like, you had a lot of success. And you can see that, like, you know, you can see that with
Yeah.
musicians. It used to be like really uncool to have your music picked up by an advertisement. And now it's like, way to go, you made it. And I don't want to like denigrate those people who are doing that, because I totally understand that like you need to figure out a way to make money.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that has not been great for the art world as a whole. And I don't think that's great for like the production of art.
It kind of like has taken the production of art into, I mean, yeah, I'm rambling, but it's kind of taking the production of art outside of just these are the art and the artists and we're making things for the sake of making the art, and then now it's like into, well, now we have people who are not only buying our paintings or buying our pieces, but also like we have designers, and there's like not, we have designers and we have people who are interested in sneakers and people who are interested in footballs with your logo on it that you designed because you're an artist, and it's worth so much commodity, and it's like there's no distinction, kind of everything is just kind of flat, and it's
Yeah, and I don't want to. I also don't want to like say denigrate designers, because I think some of the best art that's happening is like
that's true.
under the label of design, and I think there's a lot of great examples that I'm really inspired by of artists who are like, and I'm going to make my own clothes, and I'm going to design this wallpaper. I think it's not so much the medium that I'm opposed to, but sort of like the sort of like seeing success as okay, like I'm as commercialism, and instead of sort of like thinking about alternative modes of like what you consider successful. And sometimes I think those two can overlap, right? You can make really successful work and people want to buy the work, and like that's a great situation. But I think right now it's sort of like, I think that maybe we're like focusing too much on that. And I was thinking about sort of like maybe a post-war era where artists like we're not expecting to make money as from their art ever. Like a lot of the abstract expressionists were not like, great, like I just got to keep making these color field paintings, you know, for a few more years and then like ching, you know. And
yeah,
and I was thinking about like how their situation was different from our situation, and I think a major thing is cost of living. Like cost of living was so much cheaper for them. And then I think another major thing was privilege, right? Like not all those artists were privileged, but I have to assume that some of them, like I think Frank Stella went to Princeton, like
yeah,
like
yeah,
there might have been a parental stipend that was coming in. I don't know. I mean, I think that's still really true of a lot of artists. And so what I sort of came back to is like, I think what we always come back to, which is like, we need a more equal system in this country. We need a better social safety net so that people can afford to live the kind of lives, just like we were talking about sort of in the beginning, people reevaluating the shape of their lives. That if they want to make art, they can say, okay, I only have to work a couple of days a week and I can make art.
yeah, exactly. And
And
also, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
and so yeah, just sort of thinking about, it sort of gets back to sort of like one of my pet peeves that I feel like sometimes artists don't quite, not all artists really quite recognize like their place in the class struggle. And because they sort of see themselves, they see this little like golden ladder to this world of jet setting and parties and fancy people, I think maybe misunderstand like the value of organizing and like just generally improving the life of the working class. I think would improve like the scenario for making art so greatly. And I don't think that's like a, you know, totally radical statement, but I think that's sort of what it.
But it's true. And I mean, if the majority of the people in this country is the working class and our lives are like not good to the point that people are dying, there's going to be no more working class. So what's going to happen?
Yeah. And also just like if you have to work multiple jobs to just sort of barely eke by, you don't have the sort of freedom to say like, you know, if say like I wasn't worried about healthcare and jobs paid a bit more per hour, and I wasn't worried that if I had a child, like I wouldn't be able to take time off or I wouldn't be able to give them good education, I could make that choice. I could say, I actually really like my job, I want to work full time, I'll make a bit more money, maybe I'll be able to take a few more vacations. Or I could say, you know what, I don't need to make that much more money, I'm doing okay, I can choose to work less, and then I can choose to focus on my creative pursuit. And I would say like, I think that helps. I was talking about like that helps both hobbyists, right? You know, a lot of those people who might do that might never become great artists and they might just have fun in their bedroom. But I think what it would allow is it would allow a lot more people the chance to like to make art. And then I think a lot of that might be great art, and that might come from places that we're not so used to seeing, because I think the art world still so much skews towards people who have come into it with so much privilege,
Mm-hmm.
you know, who can afford to fail, who can afford to live on the edge. And I think that's totally my case too. Like, I often think, like, if I didn't grow up in this nice middle class household, would I have had the balls to say, all right, like, I'm just going to be all in on art, you know? And so sort of that I feel like we need to like set that foundation. So that's what I would hope to happen.